With Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, we are looking at one mighty handsome looking video game. And like any great looking game here for Digital Foundry, we could not pass up the opportunity to find out how it ticks. So I was delighted when I was able to sit down and talk with two engineers from MachineGames and Jacob from NVIDIA in a roundtable discussion to learn about the game's development and how its full RT implementation works. I had a lot of fun in the interview and I hope you and the audience will too. But enough from me for now, I'm going to hand this video over to my past self. Enjoy! So I'm just going to start this one off here by asking everyone to introduce themselves as well as say your position in the project.
So my name is Jim Chelin. I am the CTO at MachineGames. So I'm ultimately responsible for any technical mishaps and decisions.
My name is Andreas Larsson and I'm a senior programmer here at MachineGames, and I work mostly with rendering tech.
Yep, and I'm Jacob Freeman, GeForce evangelist, and I'm here to talk about all the great stuff that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is doing.
I guess the place to start with one is what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about Indiana Jones, of course, but we've seen a number of ray tracing implementations in the past from the games considered full ray tracing. What exactly is Indiana Jones in this update to the game and or at the launch version adding into the game that players can enable?
So the base game for Indiana Jones has a hardware ray tracing based GI solution that was originally built by our colleagues and friends over at id Software in Dallas. So they built a solution that we adopted, and then we've honed it for our needs and for our games because we make slightly different games. And then the update that was released recently with a full path tracing takes it a whole different level, where rather than doing the shenanigans that we have to do to get a performance to be able to do 60 FPS on a Series S or low-end PC, we go crazy balls to the wall and just do full ray tracing every single pixel and get the glorious visuals that we have.
I know we're going to be talking about full ray tracing here, but would you mind going into a little bit before that so we can talk about what full ray tracing is actually enhancing? What is the RTGI solution that you came up with? I was scrolling through the console variables that are there, and they mention probes and irradiance fields. Could you describe it a little bit more in depth? Because it's a wholly new technique we haven't seen before.
So, with our the regular GI solution that we're using without the full RT, it's basically an irradiance probe grid that is cascaded around the camera, and then we also have a final gather step that is enhances the details of the global illumination by tracing directly from the depth buffer. So when you're tracing from the depth buffer, you're basically picking the closest probe to the hit, and that is what gives you the indirect illumination.
Well, it's pretty impressive because you don't usually get the look of it looking like a probe solution because you get a lot of contact shadows, and I thought that was actually pretty interesting looking. But turning on the full RT ahead of that is a very different solution. Could you kind of describe, as part of the full RT solution here, what exactly are the things that are being traced?
For the path tracing implementation, we have sun shadows that are being traced, and we have specular reflections being traced, and we have the sort of full RT variant of diffuse GI as well. So we have different options in the game where you can have there's the 3 different options, right? And you have the RT shadows, the RT specular reflections, and you have the RT indirect illumination. And without the RT indirect illumination, the implementation falls back on the regular GI solution.
I'm assuming the regular probe solution probably has a temporal accumulation to get more than one bounce in there. Otherwise, you'd have very dark corners and whatnot. How does the full RT indirect illumination actually work in terms of bounces? Because we've seen various levels of bounces based upon the titles we've seen in the past. Like Cyberpunk originally had like 2, and then it moved to some sort of like screen space hashing cache that kind of came up. What exactly is Indiana Jones using?
It's sort of similar. We have one path per pixel, and then there's 2 bounces, and then you fall back on a sort of a spatial cache that stores radiance, right? So it sounds very similar to what they're using.
Okay, so when playing the game itself, what are the areas where you particularly most notice the full ray tracing implementation versus the standard GI, for example? Like, what areas would you really notice it the most?
So there's 2 big things that stand out from my point of view, and I know that Andreas shares some of this. So there's the jungle looks more realistic, more vibrant. Like you have the proper light bleeding through leaves. You have proper shadows from the trees and the canopies. We had to do some shenanigans to get performance on consoles again, because path tracing, or rather ray tracing against transparent stuff is expensive. And then there's when you're walking through corridors, when you're in Vatican or when you're in the college, all the clutter, like the things that are on the shelves, they appear properly grounded with the path tracer. Like with the RTGI solution, some of the things appear to float a little bit because you don't get a per pixel accurate contact shadow, whereas the path tracing is always perfect. And that made it's night and day with our environments.
So when I was playing the game, I did notice that you mentioned ray trace sun shadows, the specular and the diffuse, as well as there is from the specular lighting you can get like a really cool like glass, like really sharp glass reflections. But one thing I did notice was that some things would not ray traced in comparison to like we've seen in some other titles. For example, like local point light shadows or reflections on water seem to be more similar to the standard game. Could you explain a little bit about the implementation, about why those things are the way they are?
So running out of time is the reason. So technically the feature is there, but we couldn't get the performance in time for release. It's something that we are hoping that we will be able to get back to in, well, I won't say short amount of time, but in a decent amount of time, and be able to enable those things. Because all the work has been done for the bulk of it, but it's not to the level where we can give it to the public and they play with it, because then they will realize that path tracing is actually expensive.
Yeah, I would say my opinion of it so far, I've been playing through it. First of all, let me just get it out there. I love this game. This is probably one of my favorite games I've played in years. It is incredible. And graphically, it's really, really well done. But when playing the game right now, I'm really loving the path tracing implementation, but I can also see how the artists, specifically in a lot of scenes, will use for like cinematic lighting, they'll add in like a spotlight here. And it's probably driving a lot of the scene lighting, and just throwing in some ray trace shadows there might change some of the, not only the performance in the scene, but also might also change some of the artistic implementation. So it probably does require a little bit more time. I can definitely see that.
I was just going to say, going back to kind of what you were saying with, a lot of with the full RT, kind of what the biggest visual impacts are. And one of the things that obviously, like, you get the full reflections, like you would expect with full ray tracing. You get much like the soft shadows, more realistic shadows. proper occlusion like you would expect to see with full RT as well. But one of the things that really impressed me was, and Jim kind of touched on it a little bit, is like in the jungle, how you get like realistic subsurface scattering where the light is penetrating the leaf and you can kind of see the light bleed through the leaf as well, and then how it kind of bounces around beneath it as well. I think for me personally, like I was really impressed with that.
Speaking of the foliage, one thing that we've seen in the past with full RT titles, and not all of them I actually think, but I think for like Alan Wake 2 and I think Cyberpunk via an update, is that like you were saying earlier, Jim, tracing like alpha cutout geometry is very expensive. Any hit shaders are just not that great for performance. But we see on Ada Lovelace GPUs, they have this feature called Opacity Micromaps. Was that actually implemented for Indiana Jones? Because the jungle is, I think, still one of the most expensive places in the game in terms of ray tracing right now.
Yeah, we do use OMMs, as we call them. And yeah, they're crucial for performance. Trying to do the jungle without them is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and it turned out really well because everything moves 1-to-1. And that's another thing to notice with the update is that, like you're saying, all the contact shadows, really 1-to-1 lighting representation with all the objects in the environment. And I would love to know a little bit about how that was done, because that's an expensive thing in general, just to manage all those things that could potentially be moving in a BVH. What is the BVH like in this game in a given scene, and how is it updated?
So for the ecotopes, as we call them, the procedurally placed vegetation and so on, we basically do for path tracing. It requires the geometry inside the acceleration structures to be very, very close to what we see in the raster geometry. So essentially we need to pick the most important things to put in there by basically doing like loosely frustum culled gathering of all these vegetation models that go into the acceleration structure building at any point. And it is quite a bit tricky to like manage the building times and the memory footprint of all these geometries that are supposed to go into the acceleration structures. It does require a lot of video memory to just fit all the trees in there.
Like the jungle specifically is one of the things where we were supposed to be done, and then we found that there was a particular place in the game where gathering of the jungle was like 32 milliseconds. So okay, we have to fix this. It's like, okay, we're supposed to be done tomorrow, but if we have to, we had the like 2-day buffer. Okay, we're using that buffer to fix this problem.
Yeah, I think also in the game there is a setting called vegetation animation quality, which has a few different settings there, and especially with MachineGames could probably speak to this more, but especially with full RT, that can actually improve performance quite a bit if you're looking to optimize performance.
That setting is gonna help you a lot if you want to reach 60, definitely.
So speaking of VRAM, obviously path tracing increased the VRAM requirement for the game. I think the official recommendation is 12 as a baseline and then going up. But scrolling back even beyond that, this is one of the first games that I can really think of, beyond a couple of like other exceptions, that is shipping with only hardware ray tracing. And I see that as a very positive thing as someone who has been following this industry for a long time. But what was it like actually making a game that has a baseline hardware ray tracing requirement? Can you describe that a bit?
So, I think it's a little bit fitting. So if you go back in time, then Quake 3 was pretty much the first game that required hardware raster. They didn't do a software raster, and they were fine with that, and there was backlash, but everybody remembers it as a good thing. when early days for this project, when we were trying to figure out what the game was gonna be, we realized that to be able to deliver on the vision that was asked of us, we would need to have a GI solution. And looking at the state of hardware at the time, considering that consoles have hardware ray tracing functionality, and rather than building two solutions, a software and a hardware one, after talking to the creative leads on the project, I made the decision that okay, we'll actually require hardware ray tracing because our lowest common denominator is the Xbox Series S for this project, and that has hardware ray tracing, so let's do that. And sure, there are PCs that we leave behind, but we did that's like six years of hardware development, so sure, we do lose some players, but they'll be able to play the games eventually.
Where do you kind of see it going from here? Because you talked about Quake 3. Quake 3 didn't ship with a software render, which was a great thing at the time, actually, I would say, just like this is. Where do you see it going from here, both as an industry as well as also for MachineGames? Because this is your first game that's embracing it in this way. Where do you see it going from here?
So moving forward, we'll absolutely build on top of what we have. Like, we're not going back to adding software ray tracing. Maybe someone comes up with a genius software emulation solution, but I doubt it. And like, the ray tracing is the future. I'm not entirely sold on the idea that only ray tracing is the future, because it solves a lot of problems. Certainly, like, a lot of things become a lot easier when you do ray tracing, but it also pops up a whole slew of new ones. Like, one of the key things is that just managing all the dynamic stuff. Like, it's a lot of processing that you suddenly need to do that was just done by the vertex shader previously. So,
let's talk a bit about the development process for this. When did the integration of full RT actually start? Does the game, for example, does the engine already have like a full path tracer built in there for like checking the accuracy of materials or something like that? Where does it all start?
So the idea for full RT started about a year and a half ago, because we were pretty far along with the game, so that you could see where the environments were going. And I had this epiphany after looking at other full RT games. It's like, the environments would look really good if we could just light them this way, because sure, we have a GI solution, but it has its shortcomings. So I reached out to our people at NVIDIA, and within about a week and a half, there were talks. We have a history of building tech together with NVIDIA. So
yeah, I mean, just thinking back to Wolf Youngblood with its ray traced reflections there, which was at the time extremely performant. I remember, I think it was like RTX 2080 Ti is like 4K with like ray tracing out in that game maxed out. It was really fast. And that was another thing coming to Indiana Jones, is that the base game is really, really fast, in spite of the fact that it is using ray tracing. So much so that I think a lot of people were surprised before it came out. And I'd actually say the full RT implementation currently is also running really, really well. I would say, bar those areas in the jungle where the game is just so heavy in general, but that's a good thing. But offsetting the cost of ray tracing has been there ever since the beginning, by reducing ray count and also dropping resolution. And to keep it looking good, you've got something like DLSS. So could you describe a bit what it was like implementing DLSS into the game and the choices behind that?
So implementing DLSS was, I would say, a no-brainer. So if you look at our games historically, we've always had adaptive resolutions, because the key thing for us is the game always has to run at 60. It's very, very important, because that's the feel of the game matters more than the how nice the pixel is, kind of. And once the action dies down, the pixel will recover, so it's always fine. Path tracing is crazy expensive. So doing path tracing in full native resolution is certainly doable, but doing it at 60 FPS, that's no small feat. So DLSS is more or less required to be able to achieve the user experience that we want our players to have.
What do you think about, it's pretty easy to read this, I would say, feeling online that developers these days, and excuse me, I'm not explaining my own opinion of this, but quote unquote, developers these days are not optimizing their games enough. So they're overly relying on technologies like DLSS or FSR or something like that. How do you as developers actually view a tool like DLSS, and how do you view this opinion that is pretty common to find online these days, actually, from players?
Yeah, I mean, so it's expected of us to enable these things because it allows more people to play our games, and we certainly want that. Like, we shipped with DLSS only purely because there has been no games ever released that do FSR on Vulkan, so we would be the first ones. And let's just say it came in hot. So there will be support when we've actually been able to test it thoroughly.
But speaking of DLSS, the game currently right now, looking in the console commands, ships with the NVIDIA NRD denoiser. And it seems to be the standard denoiser when the PT functions are activated. There's obviously some other denoising occurring with the GI solution. But back when there was a press release that announced that this game was going to be doing full ray tracing, which excited the heck out of me, it was also mentioned that ray reconstruction was on the table there. Currently, it doesn't seem to be in the game, at least as an option.
No, that's correct. Mm-hmm. It's one of these running out of time issues.
It's still planned, yes. Yeah. Soon.
I mean, obviously that's still planned, but it's fun to talk about like what are the challenges of putting ray reconstruction in a game, just like what are the challenges of adding in PT to a game. Ray reconstruction, a nascent technology. Like one thing I noted in the past was that when we talked with Brian Cantanzaro, he mentioned that just the pure randomness of all the noise in that game specifically, with all the emissive lights and things like that, was a challenge for ray reconstruction. Have you guys noticed with the specific content in Indiana Jones, like, are there situations for denoising that are more challenging, for example?
I think we have a few maps that is indirectly lit via very tiny windows, etc. And that is typically kind of hard to denoise. I think this is in the Nepal ship. That has been tricky to denoise for sure.
As a part of that, were there things that you just mentioned, like things come in hot, you wanted to get more in there? What are some of the other things that you did want to get in there that haven't gotten in yet, for example?
So this isn't the live service game. It was supposed to be done on release day. But yeah, ray reconstruction is one of the things that will be landing. There's the FSR that will be landing. Yeah, there's a few things that may land, but it depends on timing, more or less, because the game is more or less done, so we don't really want to mess with it.
Sort of coming down to the end of the questions here, I would love to know, like, as part of integrating both the original ray tracing that is in the game right now, as well as this full PT system that you have added in, what is some of the most interesting things or best parts about your work on the project so far?
For me, the best part is seeing all the crazy stuff that the artists do. The game is massive, really, truly massive. So when you get attached to, oh yeah, we have this bug over here, can you go fix it? It's more than once where you get lost because Not because you get lost in the game, you just get lost in the visuals and start looking at things, and then after about a few minutes you realize, oh yeah, I actually had a job to do. Because they've done some really, really amazing stuff, but they've certainly done things that we couldn't think of when we built the tech to do this.
Yeah, I think for me, just the fact that we have so many different types of areas, like jungle and snowy mountains and the desert, and just making everything look good in all these like very different like types of settings has been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've only gotten just past the Vatican now because I'm taking it slow because there's a lot of side questing and I just want to explore actually, and I kind of get lost doing that and listening to all the conversations the guards have and all that. And I think I've been most impressed so far. The Wolf games actually did go to a lot of places in the past, but this is even more so. And it's actually hyper impressive that it even came together because it's super ambitious in that aspect. And it's a gorgeous looking game, one that I think everyone should be really, really proud of. On the tech side, how fast it runs, as well as just how it looks. Even without full PT, it's incredible looking. So everyone, I'd like to thank you for sitting down for this interview. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.